channel. Hi, I'm Anusha and I'm currently in my first year of medicine at King's College London, and this is the last of a series of videos that I've made to do with BMAT prep. So I'm going to be going through section 3 of the exam, which is slightly different from the other two sections in terms of formatting and what they expect from you. And we're going to be going through the techniques that I learned as well as the things that I avoided during my revision. That will hopefully be helpful for those of you in your last few days of preparation for the exam. Just to note, because I've been told this before, the black is not meant to represent any sort of theme for this video or anything like that. It's just something I chose to wear. BMAT's not that bad. So like section 2, you have 30 minutes to complete the section, and it includes a written task in the form of an essay. With reference to the BMAT website, essentially this tests your ability to formulate concise arguments, spell and punctuate correctly, as well as use grammar appropriately and correctly. So they say that you have a side of A4 to write your essay, not any longer than that, but if you look at the template, you actually have slightly less. You probably will have about 3/4 of a page because the top bit is used to fill out your admin details, and then there's a border around the side because this essay then gets scanned and marked by multiple examiners. So essentially you have 3/4 of the side of A4 to write your argument. This makes timing and technique key for the exam, so one thing above all that I definitely recommend is practice with the template, practice in timed conditions. I'll put the link for the template down below because that will really allow you to see how small you need to write, how fast you need to write, and how long you take to write. You'll be given 3 essay titles, and then you'll have to choose one of them to discuss and develop further in the form of an essay. And usually the title is based off of a quote or a short statement. Usually the 3 titles have been based around something medically related, current affairs, or philosophical, but this is not always the case, so that's something to bear in mind. When I'd spoken to people that had taken the BMAT, a lot of them said that initially section 3 was the section that they were the most anxious to prepare for because they hadn't necessarily taken an essay directed subject at A-levels, so they weren't sure how to go about preparing for it. But with a plan in place and a set strategy on how to approach and write the essay, this can easily be sorted. So the first thing I suggest is that once you've gotten your 3 essay titles, spend roughly 2 or 3 minutes deciding which title you want to write about. Make a rough plan for all of them, and this way it will activate your brain to start thinking of topics that you could potentially write about. If you find yourself struggling to think of topics for one essay title, then move on to the others and come back to that one later. Similarly, if you find yourself thinking of a lot of topics for the other essays and you think you'll be comfortable writing them, then choose that and don't waste your time trying to look for other topics, because at the end of the day, time is crucial for section 3. This is also a good chance for active recall, and not that you need to know facts and figures for absolutely everything, there's no way that you can do that, but let's say you see an essay title and there's a certain fact or figure that you think will be useful for it, you can then write it down in that rough plan, and so later on in the essay you don't have to worry about remembering it, and it'll just be there for you to write down. Now, one thing I want to mention that I learned while preparing for the exam is that there's literally no benefit of picking what you think will be a weirder or a harder question over an easier one or one that you think everyone is going to answer, because at the end of the day it's about choosing the title that's best for you and what you feel you'll be confident about writing and what essentially you think will get you the marks. Well, last year when I sat the exam, there was an essay title on teamwork and surgical innovation, and it was one that I had some background knowledge for and I really wanted to write about, but I was a bit hesitant initially because I thought it's the medical title, everyone's going to go for it. But in the end, I'm really glad that I did it because it got me a score that I was happy with, and even though it ended up being the one that most people went for, it was still one that I felt confident in. So it could literally go either way. If there's an essay title you think nobody's going to write about but you really want to write about it, go for it. Similarly, if there's an essay title that you think everyone's going to go for, still write about it, because at the end of the day it's about what you are most comfortable with. Another thing that I did was, while going through the different essay titles, I highlighted the key words and phrases that I thought I would need to link back to when writing my essay, so that I had an idea of what kind of things I could be writing about. Once you've chosen your essay title, the next important thing is to plan out the structure of your essay. I'd say this is essentially the most important part of your essay planning because it helps you to structure out what you want to write and how you want to write it in a way that is clear and communicative. So I'd recommend spending between 10 to 15 minutes on this section, depending on how quick of a writer you are. And that's not something that you'll know until you've written about 1 or 2 essays, so don't worry about that just yet. But this should give you enough time to brainstorm your ideas, as well as organise your best points and structure your essay, because you won't have enough space to be able to fit all of your points in. You're being tested on your ability to formulate concise information, so you don't want to include every single point in there. If we look at the essay title that I used last year as an example, then you can see that they've asked 3 prompt questions, which I think is really good in terms of helping to structure your essay, because this gives you 3 clear paragraphs that you can write about, 3 topics that you need to address, and 3 topics is the perfect amount to write in 3/4 of a page without waffling. I can't emphasize this enough. Make sure that you use your essay question as a guidance for when you're structuring your essay and keep referring back to it, because if you don't answer all parts of the question, then the maximum score that they can give you is a 2 out of a 5, which is not great. If you answer all parts of the question, then you get a minimum score of 3, which is a great score to have already for interview selection. So, for example, if you chose the essay title that required you to discuss an argument, the most simplified but useful structure for the essay would be have an introduction that outlines the points that you're going to be discussing in the essay, then have a paragraph talking for the argument, then have a paragraph talking against the argument, and then draw with a conclusion. If the question asked you to give your opinion, the conclusion would be where you gave your choice and what you thought about the argument. So once you've chosen the points that you want to discuss in your essay and you figured out the structure of it, it's time to finally write it. Between 10 to 15 minutes for writing your essay, but this fully depends on how quick of a writer you are. One thing that I did was when practicing the essays for the exam, I timed how long it took for me to write, and based off of that I gave myself some more time for planning or less time for planning. When writing your essay, try to make sure that your handwriting is as small and as neat as possible. Essentially, this is just to save space and make it easier to read for the examiner. If you are someone who thinks that your handwriting is quite messy, then make sure that you leave some more time for your writing. So once you finish your essay and you're happy with the points that you've included, make sure to spend the last 2 or 3 minutes just checking your essay, going through it, proofreading it, see if you can pick up on any spelling, punctuation or grammar mistakes, because that is something you're being tested on. Also make sure that you've answered all parts of the question, because as I've mentioned before, if you don't, the maximum score you can get is a 2. So I'm just going to touch upon the scoring for section 3 a little bit, because it's slightly different from the other 2 sections in the sense that it's graded from 1 to 5 instead of 1 to 9, and you get given a letter as well from A to E, A being obviously the best that you can get and E being the lowest. The A to E is based off of spelling, punctuation and grammar. So in terms of cut-off scores, generally universities don't really look at a score below 2.5 or a C, which is why it's so important to answer all 3 parts of the question so you avoid the cut-off. And in terms of average, it's really hard because every year that varies, but usually most candidates get around a score of 3 and between an A or a B for spelling, punctuation and grammar. Everyone revises differently and there's no perfect way to prepare for the exam, especially with section 3. By no means are my tips the only things that you guys need to be using, but I've collated a list that I've put up here of some of the tips that I learned along the way during my revision, as well as what I avoided. Try to avoid using asterisks to add extra points or crossing things out multiple times, because presentations wise it won't be that great when they're scanning the essay and it will make your essay harder to read. So one thing that I touched upon before and I get asked quite a bit is, should I do any further reading? If so, how much further reading should I do? Where should I look for further reading? And if I'm being honest, that's honestly up to you. I found further reading quite interesting, and if it's something that you think will be useful for the future, go for it. There's no harm in doing further reading, but you don't have to do it. It isn't necessary, because by the time you come up to your exam, news will constantly be changing. There'll be so many things that you need to read about. There are so many things that you would want to look at. So just go with what you think is most interesting for you. But I'll plug the links to some websites that I found really useful when it came to preparing for the exam in terms of further reading, and articles that I just found really interesting. Another thing I'd say is ask other people to look at your work. Don't be afraid to ask for help. One thing that I did without shame is that when I did write an essay, I sent it to my teacher and asked them to review them, look at any spelling, punctuation and grammar mistakes, as well as any contextual errors that I may have made, things that I could work on. And by doing that, it really allowed me to improve from essay to essay, even if I didn't practice a lot of essays before the exam. Be afraid to ask for help. So yeah, those are all the tips that I have for section 3 of the exam. I'm hoping that you found the video useful, and I'm hoping that there were some tips to take away while preparing your essays before the exam. And if you did find the video helpful, please make sure to leave a thumbs up. Be sure to check out the rest of my BMAT prep series for more revision tips for physics, maths, biology and chemistry, as well as section 1 of the exam. And make sure to subscribe to my channel for more content. I've got a medical schools interview series coming out soon, as well as some more medical school vlogs. So if you think that'd be useful, make sure to check out my Instagram at mygkt monologues for more info. And yeah, stay tuned.